This is the story of Woburn Abbey and the Russell family who built it. The story begins not in 1747, but 2 centuries earlier in 1547, when King Henry VIII was tearing England apart. The king had broken with Rome, dissolved the monasteries, and was distributing their wealth to loyal servants who would help him remake the nation. Among those servants was John Russell, a man whose cunning and adaptability would make him indispensable to the Tudor court. Russell had started as a minor gentleman from Dorset. Nothing particularly special about him except his remarkable ability to survive. He served Henry VIII through all 6 marriages, navigating the treacherous waters of Tudor politics without losing his head. That was an achievement in itself. When Henry began dissolving monasteries and seizing church lands, Russell was there ready to receive his reward. In 1547, the king granted him the Cistercian Abbey of Woburn. The monks were expelled. Their church was demolished. Their lands became Russell property. John Russell became the first Earl of Bedford. He had transformed himself from minor gentleman to major aristocrat through ruthlessness and timing. The abbey ruins would sit on his land for 2 centuries, a reminder of how English fortunes were built on the bones of the old world. By 1747, the Russell family had risen even higher. They were now Dukes of Bedford, among the most powerful noble families in England. They owned vast estates across the country. They influenced elections, controlled parliamentary seats, and moved through the highest circles of Georgian society. But their principal seat, Woburn, was still a relatively modest manor built from the ruins of the old abbey. The 4th Duke of Bedford decided this would not do. He wanted something grander, something that would reflect the family's status. He wanted a palace. He commissioned the architects, Henry Flitcroft and Henry Holland, to design Woburn Abbey as we know it today. The construction would take decades. The cost would be staggering. But money was not a concern for a family that controlled thousands of acres of agricultural land at a time when land was the foundation of all wealth. The new Woburn Abbey rose on the site of the medieval monastery. Georgian architecture replaced Gothic ruins. Vast reception rooms, libraries, sculpture galleries, and state bedrooms filled the interior. The gardens were landscaped in the fashionable style. Deer parks were expanded. The message was clear. The Russells were not merely aristocrats. They were among the elite of the elite. But even as the palace rose, the family's troubles were beginning. The same wealth and privilege that built Woburn also created conditions for tragedy that would haunt the Russells for generations. Francis Russell, the 5th Duke of Bedford, inherited Woburn in 1771. He was educated, cultured, and interested in agricultural improvement. He should have been the perfect aristocrat. Instead, his life became a study in the psychological costs of extreme privilege. He married twice. Both marriages were unhappy. He grew increasingly isolated, spending long periods alone at Woburn, obsessing over estate management and agricultural experiments. His son and heir, Francis Russell, Marquis of Tavistock, showed even more concerning signs. The young man was brilliant but unstable, prone to fits of melancholy that his family could not understand and doctors could not treat. In 1767, at the age of just 28, the Marquis of Tavistock died suddenly. The official cause was listed as illness, but rumors circulated that the death was not entirely natural. The family never spoke of it. The details were buried with him. The 5th Duke's grandson, another Francis Russell, became the 7th Duke in 1839. He suffered from severe mental illness throughout his life. He heard voices. He experienced delusions. He became convinced that people were plotting against him. By the 1850s, he was essentially incapacitated, unable to manage the estate or perform his duties in Parliament. He lived in isolated rooms at Woburn, attended by servants who had been sworn to secrecy about his condition. The pattern was unmistakable. Something in the Russell bloodline, whether genetic or environmental, was producing generation after generation of troubled minds. The wealth that built the palace could not buy mental health, the privilege that should have made. Life easy instead created pressures that fragile minds could not withstand. Hastings William Sackville Russell, the 12th Duke of Bedford, inherited Woburn in 1953. He was 37 years old, educated at Oxford, a decorated war veteran. He had every advantage. He also had demons he could not escape. Hastings had fought in World War II and emerged with psychological scars that 1950s England did not acknowledge or treat. What would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder was then simply weakness, something aristocrats were expected to overcome through willpower and breeding. Hastings tried. He threw himself into managing Woburn. He opened the estate to public tours. One of the first British aristocrats to commercialize his ancestral home to pay inheritance taxes that were crushing the old landed families. But the effort could not save him from himself. Hastings struggled with depression. He drank heavily. His marriage deteriorated. By the early 1970s, those close to him could see he was falling apart. On October 9, 1953, just months after inheriting the title, Hastings Russell was found dead in his bedroom at Woburn Abbey. He had shot himself in the head with a shotgun. The family tried to keep it quiet. They issued vague statements about illness, but the truth came out. The 12th Duke of Bedford had committed suicide. The palace that had stood for more than 2 centuries had witnessed another tragedy. The Russell curse had claimed another victim. Hastings's son, John Russell, became the 13th Duke at age 13. He inherited not just a title and an estate, but a legacy of tragedy and a financial crisis that threatened to destroy everything. Death duties were crushing. Maintenance costs for Woburn were astronomical. The traditional aristocratic income from agricultural rents could no longer support the lifestyle. John Russell, who would later style himself as a reluctant duke who hated the aristocracy, made a decision that would scandalize traditional peers. He would turn Woburn Abbey into a business. He expanded the public tours his father had started. He added a safari park to the grounds in 1970, filling the deer parks with lions, tigers, and elephants. He opened restaurants, gift shops, and event spaces. Woburn became not just a stately home, but a tourist attraction. The strategy worked financially. Woburn began generating enough income to sustain itself. The 13th Duke became wealthy not through inherited land, but through commercial enterprise. He wrote books criticizing the aristocracy while living in their greatest palace. He gave interviews denouncing privilege, while charging admission to his ancestral home. The contradictions seemed not to trouble him. But the commercialization came with costs that cannot be measured in pounds. Woburn Abbey, which had been a private family residence for centuries, became a public spectacle. Strangers walked through rooms where Russells had lived and died. Tour guides told sanitized versions of family history, omitting the suicides and the madness. The gift shop sold postcards of rooms where troubled dukes had spent their final hours. The mansion had survived, but something essential had been lost. Woburn was no longer a home. It was a product. The current Duke of Bedford, Andrew Russell, the 15th Duke, inherited Woburn in 2003. He continues his father's commercial approach, maintaining the safari park and the tours. The estate employs hundreds of people. Thousands of visitors pass through each year, admiring the art collection, the staterooms, and the gardens that have been cultivated for centuries. But the family's private apartments remain closed to tourists. Behind doors that visitors never pass, the current Duke and his family live surrounded by portraits of ancestors who went mad, who killed themselves, who could not bear the weight of their own privilege. The walls contain secrets that the tour guides do not mention. The Russell family today exists in a strange limbo. They are aristocrats who profit from their aristocracy while claiming to disdain it. They live in a palace while running it like a theme park. They are custodians of a heritage they cannot escape and cannot fully embrace. The fortune that built Woburn in 1747 came from seized monastery lands. The wealth that sustains it now comes from admission tickets and safari park fees. The transformation reflects the broader story of the British aristocracy, adaptation through commercialization, survival through spectacle, preservation through the very democratization that would have horrified ancestors. What does it mean to live in a house where your ancestors killed themselves? How do you reconcile privilege with the suffering it caused? Can wealth spanning centuries overcome the psychological damage inflicted by isolation, expectation, and the peculiar madness that seems to afflict those born to too much? These questions hang over Woburn Abbey, like the morning mist that rises from the deer parks. The tourists who visit never ask them. The family never answers them. The palace stands, beautiful and terrible, a monument to both human ambition and human fragility. The monks who once prayed in the abbey that stood here were expelled in 1547. Their monastery was demolished. Their way of life was destroyed, so that the Russell family could build their fortune. Nearly 5 centuries later, the palace that replaced the monastery struggles with its own form of dissolution. Not sudden and violent like the monasteries, but slow and commercial, a transformation from private residence to public attraction, from family home to heritage business. The ghosts of Woburn are not the dispossessed monks, though surely they haunt this place. The ghosts are the Russells themselves, the troubled dukes, the suicidal heirs, the men who had everything and found it unbearable. They walk these halls still, in the genes of their descendants, in the portraits on the walls, in the silence behind the tour guide's cheerful narration. Woburn Abbey stands. The Russell family endures. But the cost of that survival, measured in human suffering rather than pounds and pence, remains a secret kept behind walls that tourists can admire but never truly penetrate. The mansion built in 1747 has survived into the 21st century. Whether it can survive as anything more than a museum remains to be seen. The palace keeps its secrets, the family keeps its silence, and the visitors keep coming, never knowing the full price that was paid to build the beautiful rooms they walk through, admiring everything and understanding nothing.